Thank you, Mayor. The only subject I want to comment on today is the water rates. And we may have I think we'll probably end up having a bit of a presentation on that with Mark Van Vleck, who's here as well. The fiscal 14-15 budget is in front of the City Council. We've spent 2 work sessions over the past several weeks, or several meetings with the City Council going through that budget. And I think there's a public hearing on the budget today. Water rates are a particular issue that have come up through the budget, and I want to make a few comments about that. I want to start by saying that the water rates that are proposed to you have been done so by me and by the staff in order to operate the system in a professional, appropriate way. I don't think there's a more important asset that this city has than its water resources. We rely on having the right quantity, the right quality, having safe water. We count on it. For the most part, we don't even think about it. We just assume that it's going to be there. But there's an entire I don't know what the right word is, system that provides that asset to this community and frankly to the region. It's important. I can't think of a more important asset that this city and community and region has than its water resources. So we've proposed a budget that we believe will take care of that system. I think the last thing we want to do, and certainly the last thing I want to do, is to perpetuate a legacy of mediocrity, a legacy of not taking care of the infrastructure that we have so that it will provide service to us for a long time into the future. And one of the biggest challenges we have as a community is deferred maintenance on all of our assets. The council spent a long time and come to a conclusion last year on the street system. We're going to be debating our wastewater system. And the water system, frankly, is not that far behind it. We need to make sure that we're taking care of it. So for those reasons, we proposed a budget that we believe it will take in order to manage and care for that system. Now, having said that, we've also got our ears on. We've heard from council members and we've heard from the public that the increases in the rate that have been proposed are they're being challenged. They feel the input that we've received is that they're burdensome. And so we've taken a second look at that. And what I want to say to the council today is that we believe there is an alternative that can help mitigate those fees. As you recall, we've proposed an annual average rate of $37.75. We think that we can get that down to, help me with the number, $34.76. On the commercial rate, which is also a concern, we proposed $392 per 50,000 gallons. We believe that we can get that down to $346 per 50,000 gallons. And we believe that we can do that through the use of reserves by using something less than $9 million of our reserve bank, our unrestricted reserve bank. We are not going to propose using restricted money that is there to guarantee bond funding or anything like that. We would propose using this out of our unrestricted fund balances. We believe that we can strategically use those resources and bring those fees down. I will say that is not a permanent fix to the issue. It's a temporary fix, and I would like to, if the council is so inclined to move in that direction, I would like to combine that with a recommendation that we come back early next year, perhaps in the early spring, and have conversation about the issues around our water rates. talk about the structure of our water rates and how we administer those rates, and get a full airing of the issue with the City Council, and do it in a public forum so that everybody understands the issues that we're dealing with and the choices that we have to make, and look for a better long-term solution than the one we have right now. We think all of that's possible. We would hope that should the council move forward with this alternative, that we're able to do that. There was another point that I wanted to make, and I forgot what it was. I think what I'd like to do, Mayor, is turn some time over to Mark Van Vleck, who will walk through a presentation. This is a very complicated subject. We have tried to reduce it to its simplest terms, but I will tell you at the end of the day, it's still complicated. So, Mark, we're going to turn it to you and let you explain it to us. Mark and I have talked about this. We have rehearsed it. We have evaluated it. I tell him that my benchmark is to find a sixth grader, and if the sixth grader understands it, we've hit our target. I don't think we're quite at sixth grade yet. I think maybe ninth grade, but as I said, it's a very complicated subject, and you're probably going to get more detail here than maybe you wanted, but I think it's important that we walk through it. And if that's okay with you, Mayor, that's what we'll do next.
Absolutely, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the time and effort you put into this. Mr. Van Vleck.
Oh, I remember the other point before we turn to him.
Okay.
I think this is an important point. We are diligently pursuing the most cost-effective, efficient way we can have to manage the water system and the whole city. Okay, and I think the council is aware. We've come back to you time and time again with innovative ways that we have looked for saving money, doing more with the money we have, and the water system is really no exception to that practice. For example, what's it been, Mark? Maybe 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more than that. We went through an entire restructuring of our water utilities. We did that in order to build efficiency, so we could eliminate duplication of equipment, duplication of work between different departments, and that's really, we're starting to see the fruits of that effort now. I don't want anybody to walk away saying, well, if they would just do this or that and save a little bit of money, we could continue to manage the system more cost effectively. We are in pursuit of those efforts, and we are using them. Another one that we're going to be dealing with, it will be in front of the council in the relatively near future, is that energy costs are a huge portion of the cost of providing water resources. We have pumps and processes that use electricity, large amounts of electricity, and we're looking at ways that we can more efficiently use electricity through replacing pumps and so forth. It will make a difference in terms of the ultimate cost of our water resources. So we are pursuing ways to be efficient, and we have been, well, since I've been here, and probably before then. So the answer to this problem isn't as simple as if you just economize a little bit, you could fix the problem. It's not that simple. And we are actively pursuing efficiencies in how this system works. Okay, that's my other point. Mark.
Thank you.
Mark Van Vleck, Executive Director of Utilities. We've got about 13 to 14 slides here, so please bear with me. We're going to go through them. First one is the option that the city manager just discussed with you of being able to use some reserves to offset. I think we looked at other options, but I think it's critical to start out with a kind of a point here. If we do nothing, we don't do anything with the rates, okay, and we continue with Mary Rose Phase 2 and we do the CIP, we have a difference of cost versus revenue of $25 million. Okay, so we will be short $25 million if we just do nothing. Okay, The reserves combined of stormwater plus water are about 15 million. So even if you use 100% of the reserves, you're still about $10 million deficit there. Okay, and we'll go through where these costs are, but I wanted to start out with a point of reference of what we're trying to save here is $25 million. Okay. This is a overall, I guess, a departmental level cut on the expenses that we have. It's not looking at each section. This is the overall, and I want to highlight to you that the gold is the 2015 projected. The 2014 was the 2014 projected, which was essentially what we looked at in the fall of 2013. Okay. And you'll see that the capital improvements program is increasing, and the primary reasons for those increases are, number one, Mary Roads Phase 2. The other ones are we are looking at trying to replace the pumps at our river pump station. They were built in the early 50s. We're also trying to replace a pump station at Owen Stevens, also built in the early 50s. Both of them are it's very tough to get parts for them anymore even. We can't do it. Additionally, there is a little bit of capital improvements related to the street reconstructions. If you go to the stormwater capital improvements program, and these are the paying on the debt, a majority of those are related to street reconstructions, and even the channels that we're repairing are usually related to street reconstruction. So those two capital improvement programs are being driven by some key issues. The operations of stormwater, the slight increase there is due to an increase in some of the mowing, but to essentially try to manage those contracts, we've been partnering with Parks and Recreation. We're sharing resources, we're sharing contracts to try to control those costs for stormwater operations and maintenance, and most of the operations and maintenance for stormwater is related to mowing, but there's also inlet cleaning and those kind of things which we're going to be trying to increase that to be a little more proactive over the next year. The salary-related expenses, the increase there is primarily related to moving personnel from the wastewater fund to the water fund for the consolidation, and hopefully I hope to be able to manage that and possibly reduce. But first I needed to get all the people together working in one spot so I can figure out what everyone is doing, and we're still working through that. There's an offsetting payment from the wastewater fund to offset that increase in salaries. So the salaries are still staying pretty much the same as far as the water fund. That increase is offset by funds from the wastewater fund. The purchase of Lake Texana water, that is the annual payment we make to get our water from Lake Texana, which is a take-or-pay contract. Whether we take the water or not, we still have to spend that money. The increase there is due to their operations and maintenance costs have increased, and they are allowed via contract to pass those through to us. The contracted services, we've maintained pretty much the same, and that is where we pay for things like traffic control devices, renting equipment, and the restoration of sites after we've made a repair. That pays for the concrete work, the grass, those kind of things after we've made a repair are the kinds of things that are in that contracted work. The services from other departments, this is what we pay for, like fleet maintenance to maintain our vehicles. It pays for purchasing. It pays for engineering services. It pays for finance and accounting services. It pays for human resource services so that we don't have those within our department. We capitalize on the city's services to provide those services. The material supplies for the crews, there's an increase there, and what we're focusing on is we're going to be ordering additional meters to be able to replace some of the meters as well as some of the AMR system, and pipes and valves so that we can start doing more in-house replacement of lines focused on where we're having the most breaks. Right now, most of the lines we're replacing are related to streets reconstruction, not unnecessarily where we're encountering the most leaks. And so the purpose of that additional funds is so that we can move those over and focus on that. Light and power and purification chemicals, both of those are a slight decrease, and that is related to the reduced volumes that we plan to have to treat next year. And it's about 1.5 million less than we had last year, and that's what we're projecting as our decreased cost due to reduced volumes. And the vehicle replacement, we've reduced that because as we've consolidated the departments, we're feeling that we may be able to get rid of some equipment and be able to share resources, and so we're looking at reducing the number of vehicles we replace. This is the calculation that you go through in order to determine the unit cost for each parts of the system. I'm going to explain parts of the system on the next slide, but it's essentially cost minus adjustments, and I'll explain what those adjustments are, divided by the volume, and you get a unit cost for each part of the system. Here are our costs, and I want to highlight that the raw water is essentially your reservoirs, Lake Texana, all those costs. The treatment plant is the cost associated with taking it from the river and making it drinkable water. The transmission lines are the large 16-inch and larger lines that are in the ground that we use to transport the water, and the distribution lines are the lines that are less than 16 inches that we use, and then the stormwater is the cost that we use to operate and maintain the stormwater system. The difference in the colors on the bars, the darker color is operations and maintenance costs, the lighter color is the capital improvements program costs for each of those items. Adjustments is where we apply revenue from other sources like taps, the amount of money that we collect via your minimum charge, and other adjustments. So like in the case of the raw water, this is where we apply the funds from the Choke Canyon Fund, which was a fund that we created as a reserve to buy down rates over time. This is where that is applied. The treatment plant is where we apply the true-up. In other words, money not spent last year, we apply as a credit towards this year's rates, and that's about your 1.5 million that we didn't spend this year is applied as a true-up. The transmission lines is all the lines where we apply the meter minimum fees collected from large volume customers. Distribution lines is where we apply for commercial and residential as well as tap and disconnect fees. And stormwater, this is where we would apply the money taken from the reserves towards the stormwater portion of the rate. And now we'll go into next portion. The volume, which was underneath, which was the divisor, and if you look in the upper right-hand corner of the slides, you'll see that this is kind of following along in the equation to show you where this fits into the equation. These are the volumes associated with each part of the system and how it's used. And the raw water, all customers use and they pay for. The treatment plant is just our treated water customers. The transmission lines are all customers other than the South Texas Water Authority and San Patricio Municipal Water District, which both have their meters right at Owen Stevens, and then their water goes from there. So that's the difference between treatment and transmission lines. The difference between transmission lines and distribution lines is distribution lines are everyone other than your large volume customers. And the reason for that is most of your large volume customers, their meter is usually larger than 8 inches, so it wouldn't even fit on a distribution line. So the assumption is through the system, they're really only using the transmission lines in order to receive their water. The difference between stormwater and distribution is distribution does not include the inside city limits large volume customers. Stormwater does, but it then takes away your outside city limits residential and commercial. So it's fairly close, but there's as well as golf course is taken out of that stormwater rate. Following along again, this is to remind us where we are in the calculation. We went through the costs. We went through the adjustments. We looked at the volumes, and now the next part is to look at the unit cost. And we're going to run through two examples of doing that. The first one we're using is raw water, and the costs there are about approximately $39 million. The adjustment is for the Choke Canyon Fund, which we showed you back on the adjustment sheet, divided by the volume of 37 million, and you have $1.21021, okay, as your per thousand cost, and then we increase that by the 5-cent water supply development fee for a $1.07. Okay. Another example, okay, is the stormwater, and the key thing that I want to note here is the costs from the previous slide have went down $9 million, but the volume has reduced by $28 million. Okay? And this is where I show the adjustment. If it's about $8.6 million that we need to use from reserves to buy down this rate to offset the change in rates due to conservation. This then, if you do this for each portion of the system, you determine a rate for each part, and then you calculate for each of our rates, you determine which parts of the system that particular customer would be using, and in the case of inside city limits residential, they use all the parts of the system, so you would add all the unit costs, and it becomes $5.67
Per thousand.
per thousand. Yes. Then we convert that to a block rate, and the key that I want to highlight here is you take that 567 times a percentage to create your blocks. Your average customer using less than 6,000 gallons is actually paying less than 100% of the cost of the system. They're paying about 84%. The remainder and the difference there is made up by those using more than 6,000 gallons, as you see how our block structure works. The goal there is to be 80%, 100%, and down. The key is because of the changes in the volume, you have to keep moving it until you achieve being able to make sure these ones that are above 6,000 offset those differences on the below 6,000.
Okay, I just want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. And to those who have stated, on a sliding scale, why don't you have the large volume users, pay more? But with that said, also, sometimes it's just not that simple. But the way we have this sliding scale as, your unit cost and percentages, can you tell me if there is any thought as far as to readdress this sliding scale moving into the future?
Yes.
Okay.
This is part of the discussions I think we need to have going into the future.
Yeah.
Because this is very much relying on those using over 6,000 not reducing.
Right.
Okay. Which is not what you want. You actually do want them to reduce. So I think we'll have a discussion on the minimum.
Okay.
Raising the minimum so that, and this first 6,000, so you're getting closer to 100% of the cost. So you're less dependent on the offset from those above the average. But those are all discussions to have. But I think it's ones we need to have to be able to encourage conservation, but at the same time not have these wide ranges in rates.
That's good to hear, and I think the operative word, and we're going to get off this slide unless anyone has anything else to say, but I think I'm glad we're going to address, because we are in unprecedented times regarding conservation, how it's affecting our fixed costs, as you've very well explained up to this point. But also, another very important word is operative. We still have some more work and diligence. I'm glad that's in the future, that we're going to be looking at that, because I don't want to do this haste that makes waste, and we don't get enough time in there that it makes a little bit more sense to us, especially through conservation times on raising those caps.
Mayor, let me make a comment about that as well, please. One of the biggest criticisms that we've heard about our rates so far is goes something like this: you told us to conserve.
Sure.
We've conserved, and now you're raising as a reward for conserving, you're raising our rates. That's why we've tried to target this proposal to you to essentially erase or negate that criticism. By if the council were to adopt this proposal, it would neutralize the impact of conservation. The other point I wanted to make on this is that given the way our rates are structured, there will be fluctuation every year based on how much volume was used and the various inputs, as Mark has described here. I think part of the discussion we need to have hopefully in the spring of next year is a complete evaluation of this and restructuring these rates, the block rates and the base rate, so that you don't have the fluctuation based on conservation or weather. It should be, we should be covering our primary costs through that base rate.
I think that's a good goal, but we have to be prudent in knowing that we still have those fixed costs. And I think that will, hopefully the goal to address it and to neutralize that when we reconfigure, those caps and minimums. But I have to tell you, there's still going to be those fixed costs. Until we go through that exercise, we can't guarantee that, because I was looking at the name of the mayor that I spoke to in Wichita Falls yesterday up in Austin, and it's Mayor Barham, excuse me. And he said that because Wichita Falls is in stage 5, and they have addressed sliding scales and tried to make it equitable and tried to neutralize the effect of conservation. And they're in a lot more extreme position than we are in Corpus Christi, even though we're in one of the record droughts in the state of Texas. But just related, what the mayor told me yesterday, just related to their water utility rate, because of conservation and fixed costs and the lower revenues because of the conservation, their water utility rate in that bill went up 53%. I almost fell off my chair. And I thought it was in the 40s because Commissioner Todd Staples was in here, and there was some conversation about that. So I know there's many other cities. I'm just trying to put these in perspective, and we can always improve and make sure we watch every penny to where we don't have to be punitive when it comes to conservation. But until we work through all these exercises, I just want to make sure that we're still very mindful of how it affects our fixed costs. Thank you.
And the last slide is just running through the calculation to determine. I found that I have had many of our customers that I had to walk this through when they were reading their bill on how to calculate their actual rate. And so this runs through is essentially the entire raw water. There's no block rate associated. You take that times the 6,000 gallons. You take your minimum, which includes your fees for your meter, and then you take that 6,000 minus the 2,000 that's part of your minimum, and you have 4,000 gallons, and you multiply that times the 475, which is the block rate associated with the 2,000 to 6,000 gallons, and you add all those together, and it's 3,476.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
That was such, I'd probably love to go through this again and have an opportunity to really digest. It's a lot of detail, but it's very helpful. And it was an exercise we needed to do. And so, Mr. Olson, I appreciate your leadership in the initiative of having this communication. And I was talking to Mr. Olson last week, and I said, I'll never forget when we were going through the exercise of figuring out how much we were behind just on the maintenance side, not on the residential side of streets. And they said in order for us to become whole on the maintenance side that we needed to charge an extra $20 a month to the utility bill. And I said, that is absolutely nuts. Knowing that we had the Mary Roads Phase 2, thank God, knowing that we still had unfunded mandates, knowing that we have, the fixed costs that we have, knowing that there were some other initiatives that we had to handle regarding our utility rates and sanitary sewer overflows. And as you talked, the capital improvement, I mean, you went through it all just right now. So with all this said, our taxpayers can only handle so much. And although this has been a council of infrastructure and they've had the political courage to put the street maintenance fee and to stop the bleeding, there's only so much that a family can afford within a certain window of time. So I don't know how to say how important your efforts were to go and take a step back and reevaluate an opportunity to take some pressure off on utility costs. And but with that said, we have a lot of work ahead in front of us. And so personal thank you to all of you all. Mr. Scott?
Well, first I want to confirm your statement earlier that you weren't sure you were going to make the 6th grade mark. You did not make the 6th grade mark.
It is very complex.
Anyhow, thank you. I support the proposal, Ron. Thank you. I support the effort to neutralize the impact of conservation. I had a number of conversations that went like this. Hey, I get Mary roads too. Get it? No need to pay for it. Get that. For the most part, get the CIP, voted for streets. I know there's a cost associated. But then, like you said, you asked me to conserve, I conserved, and now you're punishing me. And I think this proposal eliminates that part of the conversation. I think everybody wants more water. I think everybody supports Mary roads too. We've talked about it for years, and as I recall, there was no public comment the day we voted to implement that project. In fact, David talked about that. I think the ratepayers, at least I hope they knew that there was utility costs associated with street improvements. We talked about it. I think we tried to kind of be very overt about that so we didn't have that pushback during the last couple of campaigns. So that's really what we're left with. And so I appreciate it. I appreciate you doing this. I'm welcome a conversation on this at a later date. I think we need more of a long-term perspective. I thought I recalled some time ago that we had begun to try to make rate adjustments for more than 1 year periods. I remember Oscar talking about, let's not try to fix stuff up or down on 1 year periods. Let's recognize it takes 3 years to make these changes. And so I welcome a kind of a longer term perspective, and I appreciate your comments about power. I think the McKinstry effort is very valuable, and I'd like to see that, and I'd like for us as a city to talk about that, how we've implemented that, and we're doing that during this fiscal year to try to minimize future impacts. So anyhow, support the proposal. Appreciate your work.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Do I understand, of course, industry is extremely critical to us, and we want to be equitable and fair with them. But do I understand on the residential side, it's by trying to neutralize the effect of conservation efforts, it's $2.99? That as far as on the rate?
Yes.
Okay, so our goal and the recommendation is that originally we had a proposed rate increase, and we're going to reduce it now by $3.99 on the residential side, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, through this exercise of going through the reserves.
This slide right here. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then we'll look at the longer term on having some future stable utility rates. Thank you. Mr. McGill?
Thank you, Mayor. Let's see, I've got a quick question. I believe it was slide 9. I wasn't sure about the number. I just want to clarify something. Yes, on that water supply development fee, I just want to clarify that is not a new fee, correct?
No.
Okay.
That is a fee we approved. I can't remember the year.
About 3 years ago. Okay, I just want to clarify for public consumption and for the sake of everyone listening that this is not a new fee. This is something that actually helps us invest in future water supply, and it's been in effect for several years.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I do agree with the stabilization of our rates and doing so with that conversation in the spring, addressing the systemic issues with our rate structure. I think it merits that conversation. Let's see, if we were to use the unrestricted fund balance on a short-term solution like this, how would it negatively affect our bond ratings?
We still retain, short answer, I believe, is no. And I want to assure the council that according to our bond covenants, we need to maintain a certain amount of coverage for our debt service every year. And this proposal does not touch any of our required coverages, and it still leaves, I forget, approximately $6 million in our unrestricted fund balance. So, while we do want to build our fund balances to healthy amounts, this is not going to negatively impact us at this time.
Okay, great. And my direction there was really just looking at, on a short-term fix, you want to make sure that we're not paying for it further in the long term by decreasing our bond rating. So, and on the handout that you'd given us a couple weeks ago, we saw that like the mayor referenced, the $5.24 of the proposed increase from 2 weeks ago, $3.08 of that was fixed costs and consumption. So my eye is on improving our bond rating, and hopefully as that bond rating, as we keep our eye on that improving bond rating, we can refinance debt and therefore saving a huge amount of money in the future. So I think we need to keep our eye on improving that bond rating. And then I guess in clear terms, and you asked a question that I was going to ask too, Mayor, on that reduction. So as we state to the public, the three things that drive a utility rate increase were the fixed costs and consumption, capital improvement program, and Mary Roads Pipeline Phase 2. That's $5.24 from 2 weeks ago. That's down $2.99. So that's looking like the increase would be $2.25. Is that correct? Okay, I just want to be clear with the public on what they expect. So we've effectively, through this proposal, or you, staff, have looked at this, through direction from us of reducing it $2.99 to an increase, utility increase of $2.25. Okay, I just want to be clear with that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification, just for, is Ms. Sanchez in the back, or is she behind you, Ms. Constance Sanchez? I will tell you, I'm glad he brought up the information about our bond ratings. Frankly, we have some of the best bond ratings in the state. We're very healthy there, and the reason we had a self-imposed cap on a tax rate through a charter election, and that affects us to having the most highest superior bond rates. And so I just want to let you know that's one of the self-imposed hurdles that we have, that otherwise with what we are currently exercising within our will, within our practices, and within our efficiencies, we're doing well. There's always going to be room for improvements, of course. But is that correct? You want to talk a little bit about that charter mandate that was voted years ago? In other words, for us to get any better of a bond rating, just to get that out of the way, then we would be able to increase it. If you wanted to address that.
Yes, ma'am. And that tax.
Could you speak a little closer and louder?
That cap is for general obligation bonds. And so we do not have a cap on our revenue bonds. So that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But as far as our general obligation bonds, we are capped at 68 cents to raise our property taxes every year, other than voter approved debt. If it's voter approved debt, then that's what's called above the cap. Mm-hmm. So, and that is like a negative mark that the rating agencies do count against us when we do go for our ratings for our general obligation debt.
Even though we've moved away from that, we're not even anywhere near that cap.
Right, but in worst case scenario, if we had to raise it to the maximum, we wouldn't be able to because we're limited. Right. And that's what they look at.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I felt we had to have that factual conversation. You helped me remember another element to it as well. Thank you. Ms. McIntyre?
Thank you. I'm going to take this to all of my classes, and we're going to start with the 5th grade, get all the way up to 8th grade, and see if I need to run over to the high school and borrow some kids to see where we can get there. I think we're going to find some kids that'll get there, because I think you did a really great job, actually, of explaining that, and I appreciate all of the effort that you did. Are we going to, if we want to motion to accept this presentation on using the reserves to help offset the rate, are we going to do that under the budget presentation later, I would assume? Is that correct?
What I'm anticipating is that after the public hearing and the council has heard what you need to hear, that you will give us, give me, the staff, direction on how to amend the proposed budget
Great.
in order to get ready for our first reading next week.
Perfect.
Now, it could be done other ways, but that's what I'm hoping for.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that. I am, I strongly support using that reserves to do that, and I do recognize this is buying a year to look at the system and to see, looking at our rate structure and really revamping it. And when you look at it, you can see that, you know, your costs, when you have so much that's in the infrastructure of the system that doesn't depend on how much water is flowing through. You have to fix it so that you can make the rate then less dependent on how much people are using. So I strongly support that. Knowing then that the discussions that we have to have later are not only the rate structure, coming back with the reorganization and really seeing, after it has a little bit of time to flush through, to see what some of those savings that we have in those departments are, and to see if there are other opportunities for that, as well as McKinstry. And then also communication within it, with how that rate is reserved, and letting people know that our rate does communicate what we want them to do, and how we want to reward conservation instead of be punitive with it. So the communication in those pieces as well. But thank you very much for bringing this through, and I'll let you know how my kids do with it.
Thank you.
Mr. Loeb.
Thanks, Ron. You know, I when I first heard the number, I thought, oh, this is the issue we're going to talk about at budget. And then we had the meeting, and then the news story started, and I'm glad nobody egged my house or anything. But, you know, I appreciate you going and looking at what we can do and coming up with a solution. I think it's a pretty simple explanation. We have reserves for emergencies. This is an emergency. And I think what we have to remember is that this is a punt. This buys us a year. It doesn't buy us forever. And we all eventually have to pay enough money to have a water system. And that when this drought is over, knock on wood, people have to remember to put some money aside every year so when the next one happens, this is possible. And I will not be up here for the discussion in the spring, but I will put thoughts into it. But I think one of the things I would say is look at how maybe some of the high-end revenue can be automatically put into the reserve for times like this. Because I think, you know, one of the discussions I've had with people is that I think it was Midland. They said anybody over 10,000 gallons, if you're residential, you pay 5 times the rate per gallon as somebody who's below it. But what you do when you do that is we get a lot of money from the people. You know, when you create a tiered system where you charge people a lot of money, the more they use, you get a lot from residential lawn watering. And so then when you go into a drought, you get hurt even worse because you tell people, okay, you've got to stop doing that. And so you stop that revenue. And then you have no choice but to put it on everyone else. So I would just say, in talking about the structure, really work on a way to set some of that money aside so when a drought does happen, there's that money to fill in the gap when you're actually telling people to conserve and conserve so you've got the water to sell and for everyone to use. But I think this is great work. I told somebody this morning if they thought the street fee was daunting, this one's going to be bigger, I think, because stormwater is going to come up, and that one's an entirely separate and equal one to water. So it's basically like having the 2 street fees being negotiated and talked about at the same time.
We're going to put you on the Stormwater Committee.
Oh, wow. Oh. God. Can't you, like, put me on the appraisal district board or something? End my political future by putting me on the Stormwater Committee.
Oh, God bless you.
But I would say that's just my comment. But I think I think this is a good council to, and I hope that that discussion next year is conducted with the same diligence that the discussion on streets was. I would say use that kind of as a use our final months on the street fee as the roadmap to do the staff work. Is, you know, this is what this person, you know, this is this type of user, and this is how much they would pay under these type of systems, because there's going to be the argument over what's fair, and there's going to be a notion of fairness for everybody who gets a water bill, and it's going to come. It's going to be the council's responsibility to make a decision. Otherwise, we're going to be back here next year, and it's going to be the same rate increase, unless it rains a lot, which we hope it does. But it could be, even if it does rain, we could be back in this situation next year if we don't do something about the rate model. So that's my comment, and I look forward to voting on the recommendation when we get later on in the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Loeb. Ms. Riojas?
Thanks, Mayor. Well, David, you could always come back for public comment every Tuesday and be a part of the discussion
Shake
on
my
that side.
fist.
No, I want to just, I really echo a lot of the comments that my fellow council members have said. But for me, the best part of this process was that we listened. We listened to the residents. We proposed something. They spoke, and we listened. And I really appreciate you, Ron, and the staff and council listening and going back and seeing what we could do to make some adjustments. And I understand they're temporary, and I'm glad that we are using that word, that they're temporary, but that we are committed as a council. And it's going to have to be a courageous decision again for us to make, that we're going to have a conversation about this going forward so that we can find a long-term solution, not just a short-term solution. So I'm glad that we listened to the residents, and that we encourage the residents to be part of the process in the future, just like they were for the street maintenance fee. And so, but thanks to staff for putting lots of time and lots of effort into this process and what's being proposed. And so I look forward to voting on this change once we get through the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Riojas. Mr. McGill?
Quick item I failed to mention. On the energy cost savings, I would recommend reaching out. Corpus Christi Army Depot has seen extreme savings through their energy savings efforts. And Mark Gonzalez, if you reach out to him, I think he would share some good insight on that. Thanks.
You know, I almost wanted to mention solar power, but then I know that capital investment and then us consolidating our plants and you know, those are long-term initial big capital investments that have the long-term savings. And I know that ultimately we were talking about how we're going to consolidate plants and be more efficient for the long term. So that's why I thought, but I would love to hear what Mr. Gonzalez has to say at the Army Depot. Mr. Garza.
Thank you, Mayor. Just echo everybody else's comments. Appreciate the work staff did, city managers done in order to be able to dial back the increase, not the rates, but dial back the increase. I am looking forward to discussion in the spring to see what we're going to need to do long-term. Utilizing the reserves, of course, is not sustainable. So we've got to look what we're going to do long-term and what kind of opportunities we have in order to be able to make sure that we're going to be able to take care of our system. I mean, it's not just a matter of the water. It's being able to sustain and to manage a system that's going to be reliable and it's going to last us in the long term. I believe in leaving things better than I found them, so I certainly appreciate all the efforts that we're trying to do on the water system, on the wastewater system, stormwater system. So again, thanks for your hard work. Okay.
You know, we're going to close up this conversation, but I always say some of the advantage that I have from when I first started on council is having that institutional knowledge. And now every time we have an issue that comes up that has a systemic problem, the reaction in the past would be a Band-Aid or hire a consultant and let's just try to buy some time and get through this crisis until we get to the next one. And what I can't tell you how much I appreciate is now when we get to a systemic problem, we are tackling it. I mean, that is the distinction that you have with our city manager leadership, with the Mark Van Vlecks, the ACMs, the deputy city managers, the staff that we have here, all the way from entry level at the city. The culture is changing. And so I can't tell you how much I appreciate that you all are tackling these problems. And this council has the political courage to stand behind you, and they have your back. And so I thank the council for that. Is there anything else, Mr. Olson?
That's all I have to say. Thank you, Mayor.
You didn't need a move to direct? You got.
We will in the public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can do it now, you can do it then.
Sure.
Whatever your choice
Miss
is.
McIntyre, Miss McIntyre, did you want to go ahead and do it now or wait till the public hearing?
Mr. Olson would prefer to be at the public hearing, so we'll go ahead and do that then, because that's going to tie into other discussions, I would assume. So we'll go ahead and wait until then. That would be great.
Okay, we're going to do anything else before we go into executive session? Well done, Mr. Van Vleck.